it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Hello, so a game week featuring perhaps the harshest binary between the haves and have-nots I think I've ever seen comes to a close with Anthony waving his Irish flag as Michael Obafemi scores late in stoppage time at Old Trafford, once and for all consigning Harry Maguire to trash status. Well, yeah, what a week for Sterling, Antonio and Jesus owners, plus Martial people too. Though, for the rest of us, not so much. Joining me to pick over the wreckage, the whole crew is back together again, and Anthony returns to the pod, and, of course, Nick too. Nick, you alright?
Hey mate, yeah, I'm all right, thank you. I feel like we're really starting to hit that butt end of the season, aren't we? And had a similar butt end score this game week too, which we'll digest in a minute. But just to remind people who we are, firstly, we are Who Got the Assist. We're on Twitter at WGTA_FPL for Tom, at WGTA_Nick for myself, at FPL Stag for Anthony. And we're also on Instagram, WGTA.FPL. So, yeah, we're joined again by Antonio after illness saw him red flag last week. How are you?
Hey lads, good to be back again on a lovely July evening here in Ireland's real capital, Cork, my home place. But yes, unfortunately did miss the last pod, was just a wee bit sick, had a bit of a headache. Someone seemed to think that I had coronavirus online, which was funny in the Twitter DMs or mentions. But yeah, no, rumours of my downfall were indeed exaggerated. So look, we'll move on to the agenda of this pod anyway. We'll start off with the market forces and our game week reviews as per now these days. And then we're going to look at and discuss hindsight and judging decisions by outcomes and the world of FPL in general and how people seem to assess how they've done week by week, how they assess players, etc. Then we're going to move on to our standard listeners' questions, and then we'll look at our own teams, transfers, captains, etc., etc. But first of all, let's start with the game week review, and it's a game week review like no other, isn't it, Tom?
Yes, it's one like no other. It's one where you have beaten both of us soundly. Yeah, the grin on Anthony's face is boyish in the extreme. Let's start with me first. It's the fall after the pride of me this week. I mean, I can't complain because of how well last week went. This week is back to earth with a bit of a bump. It's 45 points, which is not fantastic. Basically, things didn't go my way in the way that last week things really went my way. The key point scorers were Vardy came in, got 7 points. The guy that sold Jimenez got 8, but it was a lucky pen. All right, it was all about resulting in a minute. Mahrez got an assist. And Fernandez got an assist. Oh, and Dean Henderson at the back as well got an 8-pointer. The biggest victory of the week, Craig Dawson, 3 points. He thieved the bonus. But really, I love the poetic justice of this week compared to last week. Last week, I was sitting around hoping that Kevin De Bruyne didn't do anything, and he only got 1 assist in the game. This week, my captain, who was the high-owned player like Kevin De Bruyne was last week, only got an assist in the game. So, yeah, 45 points. I think I've got like a slight red arrow, probably 10k down to, I don't know, 110, 115k, something like that. But compared to where I was not very long ago, I'm not going to quibble with that too much. Before we get to Anthony and his gloating kind of spree, let's take Nick first, shall we?
Yeah, sure. So you might have seen on Twitter that I had a pretty rubbish week. In the end, I managed to score 35 points, which is pretty damn terrible. I mean, it started off reasonable with Aaron Cresswell, of all people, keeping a clean sheet there, which was only dampened slightly by the fact that Twitter was awash with all the people that got the Antonio four-goal haul. But after that, things just really sort of descend quite quickly into what felt like a farce. Mane had been kept out by Nick Pope, who put an absolute storm of a performance in multiple times. But of course, Pope actually managed to get himself yellow carded in last minute, which someone calculated it costs 4 points because he would have got 3 bonus if he hadn't got that yellow card. Ended up getting no bonus at all and matching Ben Foster. So that was a bit frustrating. Obviously, Mane was my captain as well. So to just see chance after chance get squandered, very, very frustrating. Pulisic blanked, and then it was the City game where De Bruyne did absolutely nothing in a 5-0 victory, and Mahrez only got a solitary assist while Sterling hauled. Wolves up next, 2 Wolves players sitting on my bench with a nice 8-pointer and a 6-pointer didn't come on, so I didn't get any of those lovely points, unfortunately, from Jimenez and Saiss. And then Soyuncu happened. He was on for a clean sheet, it seemed.
I forgot you owned him.
Oh, my word.
Taken away with 2-goal deficits and a very reckless red card, complete idiot there, and Bournemouth ended up scoring 4 in that game, and it was a -3 contribution to the previously reliable man. And then it was fine in the United game, and I felt like a little bit, because I didn't captain Bruno, I kind of got away with more collateral damage to my team there. Rashford managed to pick up a goal and possibly one bonus, but Greenwood did nothing. So yeah, not my best week. I think the gap's now only like 3 or 4 points somehow between me and you. I don't know how that's happened. It was about 50. It was actually more than 50.
It was last week.
It was about
It's all
70,
down to last
I
week.
think, at one point in the last couple of game weeks, and now it's only 4 points. So yeah, open season here. Finally, I hear you had a really good week for a change. Look forward to hearing about it, Anthony. Go for it.
Like, look, really good is an exaggeration. Like, look, I didn't have Raheem Sterling. I didn't have Mikel Antonio. I got 60 points net, 68 actually. So I took a -8, and basically I got rid of the real dross in my team, which was Harry Maguire. And Nketiah also got rid of Riyad Mahrez as part of a move basically to get in Tony Martial, Jamie Vardy, who I captained, and good old Tariq Lamptey, who is just a very cheap enabler on my bench from Brighton. So look, 68 points or 60 points overall takes me to the top 750,000. So we're really pushing on this season. But look, realistically, Martial coming in was a big thing for me. Captain Vardy, obviously expected that to go an awful lot better. And I guess when you make your transfers and restructure your team with a view to making a captaincy decision and it turning out like it did with Vardy, that probably isn't a success. And realistically, you know, the only success would have been to bring in and captain Sterling, but it was never on my agenda, to be perfectly honest with you. So I'm quite content really to have got as many points as I did. It's been a crap season. It's nice to have a good week at least once, but I'd need quite a few more of them to have any sort of respectable rank come game week 38.
Yeah. As I said, I think it was a good week to have a good week, and same week last week was. But I mean, for this one particularly, I think the average is going to be very, very low. I mean, as you probably have heard, none of us three had kind of the holy trinity. I think maybe you can probably put Martial in actually after goal assist and free bonus tonight of Sterling, Antonio, Martial, or Jesus. None of us had any of those 4. If you have one of them, you're probably on for a green arrow 2+, and you were really rocketing away, weren't you? And I guess to assess how the player base is reacting to that quadrumvirate doing very, very well. Nick, market forces, what's going on?
As you said, it's Sterling and Antonio that did particularly well this game, and of course they're being bought in their droves. So over 100,000 transfers now for Raheem Sterling, who turned up with a hat-trick. Man City, obviously some fantastic fixtures to close the season off with Bournemouth, Watford, Norwich. Obviously a lot of people looking at him there, and Antonio with a 4-goal game. Obviously Watford up next as well, playing out of position. A lot of interest there. 65,000 transfers in the time of recording for him. So I think there's no surprises at all. Those guys are being heavily bought. I was a bit surprised actually by the third and fourth most transferred in players. This Ings with 62,000 transfers in, and Mason Green with 61,000 transfers in, mainly because they were only just playing. And I was just surprised to see so many people making these early transfers before the Manchester United-Southampton game had started. I mean, you can see that sort of thing generally at the beginning of the season, obviously, when there's a lot of, like what I'd call potentially casual gamers. But, this kind of tail end of the season, to see so many people making the early moves, especially when you're probably not too worried at this point about price changes compared to the beginning of the season where you're trying to chase the rises. I found that a little bit odd to see those guys, but you can understand why they're being targeted with Southampton's remaining fixtures and United's remaining fixtures as well, and the players' form. And finally,
it is no surprise that Greenwood is in there, though. Maybe just throwing in just because people are just trying to free up value to get Sterling into their sides. Like 11.8 is a pretty steep price tag, really. So if you can bring in a now 4.9 Greenwood, that's going to give you an extra bit of cash to make that happen.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's just surprising that people couldn't wait until tonight,
of course,
wait until the football's over before they made the move. And yeah, Jesus, who Tom mentioned, heard us on the pod, probably decided to show us up with a goal and 2 assists. He's also been performing pretty well in the underlying stats, so he rounds up the top 5 in terms of transfers in. In regards to the sellers, it's Soyuncu. Obviously, he's suspended now, 120,000 transfers out. Though it didn't seem like there was any particular defenders that were really being bought in. No one in the top 5. the most transferred in defender right now is John Egan with 45,000 transfers in. A lot of people obviously saw his couple of goals. I think he's going to score week in, week out. Maybe we'll address that a little bit later. Tarko with 37,000 transfers in, and Luke Dean, 26,000 transfers in. He's a bit more expensive, but Everton have some really nice fixtures. And also Aspilicueta, 25,000 transfers in. Another interesting one, but Chelsea have Norwich up next, so people looking at that specific fixture probably and thinking Aspilicueta could potentially get some returns there.
Yeah, in truth, there's some serious outcome bias there, I think, in particular with John Egan. I think that's nicely ties in with what we'll be talking about a bit later on in the pod, as you said.
Yep, exactly. Rounding up the sellers, it's the Liverpool guys that are being heavily sold. Sadio Mane, 55,000 transfers in. Salah, 54,000 transfers in. And Alexander Arnold, who started on the bench, been a bit quiet recently, 52,000 transfers out. So clearly a lot of movement now towards selling Liverpool assets, especially considering perhaps they've got tougher fixtures to come with Arsenal and Chelsea up next.
Well, I mean, none of that is surprising, is it really? I think that we're probably going to see maybe some movement this evening, I guess, after the game. But with a 2-2, I guess it's going to be Martial seeing some upwards thrust after all that we've seen. Let's move on to the main topic this week, which is kind of to go psychological a little bit. After a kind of below par week for Nick and Anthony, full of regret for the course of the season, I suppose, plus that kind of chasing points in the market forces, all of that sort of got us thinking about decision making and how we perceive of it. It's also inspired by the question that we got from FPL PATSD last week about this and kind of how we perceive of bad game weeks and perceive of things going slightly wrong for us. Forgive a bit of self-indulgence on our parts here, and congratulations to those captaining / owning Sterling, Antonio, something. Hats off to you. Hope you also find this useful. So the key theme is, how do we judge decisions? As Anthony mentioned a second ago, outcome bias is the first thing to talk about here. Now, just to introduce this and explain it to you, outcome bias, or resulting in poker, is something I've mentioned a few times, and it's perhaps the single biggest thing outside of hindsight, which we'll speak about in a little bit, I see happening in how FPL managers respond as game weeks go. Simply put, outcome bias is the tendency to evaluate the quality of the decision based on the outcome rather than the thought process. So people who succeed at the end of a game week in FPL terms are assumed to have made better decisions than people who failed. In life and in FPL, this means that people who made the right decision to be cautious and not risk it, because that works the majority of the time, but failed, are punished a lot more than those who took irresistible risks that happened to work out. So, for example, captaining a mad pick that most people would never even countenance. There's one good study on this, which I've shortened, truncated, and abridged for you guys, which used a legal case to ask subjects whether a city, this was a UPenn experiment, should have done certain preventative actions like flood risks. When exposed to the evidence the city had at the time, so before they knew an event had happened like a flood, only 24% of people felt that the city should have invested in flood protection controls. But when exposed to the outcome that this action was supposed to prevent, this rose to 56% of people saying that they should have invested money. So it's just basically the impact of knowing the outcome and using that to judge the decisions that have been made. Outcome bias then, guys. Do you see this often in FPL? I'm guessing the answer is yes, considering we spoke about this earlier on.
It just kind of screams bloody Twitter to me. That's what it screams. It's just like the fact of the matter is that every week and I think we maybe internalize it. You're either an idiot or an absolute genius, depending on how your picks do. And I think this game week was a pretty good exercise in that, and it's the contrast between how Mo Salah did and how Raheem Sterling did. Of course, Salah, having hauled last week, would have been a popular enough captaincy pick going into this week. Sterling, of course, was coming into form and obviously absolutely delivered one of the biggest performances of his season today, or this weekend. But the fact of the matter is that Salah had as many big chances as Sterling. Salah had more shots in the box this week than Sterling, and there was a 40-point swing there if you captain Sterling compared to Salah. So it's like it is unfair when people say that, someone who captained Salah or had Salah made the wrong decision. The fact of the matter is they didn't necessarily. It just didn't work out that way. But it's just typical, isn't it?
Yeah, I certainly think it's typical. I mean, I kind of tried to look at this from my own personal experience this particular game week, and I do certainly think, I'm not going to look at my decisions and think, oh, I'd make certain decisions or other decisions if I had the, obviously the outcome bias here. And ultimately, I think, I think that's mitigated to a certain extent behind my logic. I think if my thinking was sound, I'm not going to beat myself up too badly about it. For instance, like I'm quite happy with the fact that I didn't make any transfers at all this game week. It made sense with the lineup I had, with the strength on the bench, and it's just unfortunate, for instance, that the guys on the bench didn't come on because I've got 1-pointers from the likes of Trent Alexander-Arnold or Mane created 5 chances and couldn't score any of them at all. It was just these certain unfortunate elements. And the other example, obviously, Manchester City assets backing them, the logic behind that was sound. It just turned up that other Manchester City assets delivered on the day. Playing Salient against Bournemouth, Operation Target Bournemouth, it was a sound decision, I believe. I wasn't aware, didn't expect him to do his best Karate Kid impression and get him sent off in a fit of rage and end up with a -3 pointer there.
Yeah, so angry Farquad, really going at it, wasn't he? So I asked the Twitter about this as well. So we asked, how do you judge how well you've made decisions in FPL? 20% said by the thinking/approach. 31% said by the result/outcome. 38% said a combination of both, and almost 10% said I never dwell on the result. So the winner was a combination of kind of thinking and the result in terms of judging how things are going on. But notable that kind of almost a third take result outcome to be kind of the key reason why. And there's obviously a few good reasons why. Like if you look at some of the responses or points at the end of the day, so one person said, another person said, real life isn't adjusted for luck, which again, that completely makes sense. There's a valid points to make. But I guess to shift on to kind of how we evaluate these decisions, I think what Nick said there was really pertinent in that if my thinking was sound, I'm not going to get too upset. The key thing for me in terms of evaluating decision making is peace of mind. And I've gotten a lot better over the time I've been doing WGTA at making my decision and closing the door behind it. Like I'll happily reevaluate the decision in the cold light of day. But it's often a futile exercise, I think, to apply full-on regret to the decision-making process. Because often, as Nick just said as well, I trusted on the right thing and the right thinking behind the decision I've made, and I recognise the sense of outcome bias. I'm not sweating, for example, the fact that I'm 1 point down this week by throwing out Jimmy, who got a pen goal and 8 points, for Vardy, who got 7 points. I'm just not going to regret that, to be honest. And I guess most importantly of all, like if you have this sort of sense of peace of mind, I don't think there's so much about making the right decision or making the wrong decision. It's more about kind of reframing the question, I suppose. It's not about asking, was it the right decision? It's more about asking, are you happy with the decision you made? And another thing to say here is that I more often than not make sure I weigh the impact of luck or randomness quite highly in FPL. So a lot of people dismiss this. It's worth noting as being an excuse for poor outcomes, or if you've done very, very well, people say, oh, he just got lucky this week, or she just got lucky this week. But I think FPL is fundamentally about putting yourself in the right position to get lucky. We've all watched a lot of football in our lives, amplified by the recent orgy of football on our screens, and that's really concentrated this luck sort of thing to me, or the randomness thing to me. From way back in Euro 96, Gascoigne missing that sliding chance versus Germany, all the way to Aubameyang being gifted 2 goals versus Norwich, and Salah missing that TAA assist this weekend. But things can be so damn different if things are just a tiny bit different. So I think that it's probably always useful to ask yourself a different question, which is, are you happy with the decision you made, rather than beating yourself up about it being the right or wrong decision?
Yeah, like as you say, I was kind of considering maybe those margins and maybe the sorts of things that, the thinking or approach, let's say, that we use to justify our decisions, which I guess in my case this season hasn't necessarily worked out, but in theory should work out because, you've done your homework and you should then get the points. And I think I was thinking of, let's say, how poorly Liverpool's defence performed in the opening game weeks of this season. I think they went 1 clean sheet in approximately 10 game weeks. Alisson, of course, got injured, but they still continue to have an absolutely brilliant XGC, but nope, couldn't keep a clean sheet for the life of them. There's these penalty reliant players that have had a streak lately. Bruno Fernandes is one. He's obviously been an extraordinary signing, but the fact of the matter is he's been fortunate sometimes to get the hauls that he has, and it's been because of penalties. De Bruyne, similarly. Jamie Vardy and the whole of the Leicester team, in fact, outperforming their XG for half a season. You can't necessarily legislate for these minor things kind of going one way or the other. And of course you would have been right to have Vardy in your team, but equally your thinking wouldn't necessarily have been wrong if you didn't have Vardy in your team, for quite a few weeks at least. I think there's a point where the momentum is such that you probably can't continue to ignore him, though.
Yeah, I think another example there of those sort of penalty takers is Willian, of course, as well. He seems to be really thriving, I guess, in the absence of Eden Hazard, being on all those set pieces and penalties. And you could say, oh yeah, we should have seen this coming potentially. But Willian, this is a player that's been in the Premier League for 7 years and never scored above about 140 points or so. So, you know, the logic, we still feel like the logic was sound there in terms of saying, no, this is not perhaps the best asset to select from, especially when you had so many other assets available in midfield.
Yeah, and I think the Willy Wagon is probably a really good example of that and how things sort of revert, right? So what can we learn from all this? What can we learn from all these experiences? I think recognizing these fine margins or the role of randomness in sport and fantasy sports is really important. It creates variance, so deviation from an expected mean. Think about it as a pendulum swinging totally between 3 points. On the left, totally against you. In the middle, sort of matching your expectations or stats expectations at least. And on the right, totally going your way. And what makes it swing is down a lot just to randomness, the player being in the right position, the contact being perfect, getting that nice little nick off the post rather than hitting the defender and going wide. As I said, FPL is a lot about putting yourself in the position to get lucky. And again, this isn't me hiding behind luck as a catch-all. There's many things that managers can do to improve things, such as guarding against overthinking, over-management, which we've spoken about in the past. We try to control this as often as we can through careful planning and research, analysis, and we all, try to make sure that we're trying to get in our positions to get lucky, as I've been saying, but often we are just at the mercy of fine margins. As I found out to my joy last game week, as Nick's found out to his chagrainness, and maybe as Anthony has throughout this entire season. But the fact that you've kind of put all that kind of good thought and put that work into what you've been doing, and it's just not gone your way, shouldn't mean you beat yourself up, because at the end of the day, you've done the work. It's just not really worked out for you. And a good question here as well. Martin H asked, how can we tell the difference between an avoidable blunder and sheer bad luck? Because is everything down to luck? I don't think so, right?
We can't say that every decision you make is unlucky. There's certainly such a thing as making a bad decision or making a bad transfer in FPL. Perhaps, an example from current situation maybe would be if you had made that move where you were going to target Harry Kane or something like that and then taking the -4 to bring in Kane and sell Salah, perhaps that would have been considered more of a blunder than bad luck. We've got memories of Harry Kane, we've got memories of his fantastic performances in the past. We know what he used to be like a few seasons back, but we also, the reality is we're aware that he's not quite the player he used to be. Spurs are not quite the team they used to be, unfortunately, and then that was very indicative of that Bournemouth performance where they didn't even register a shot on target, which was just horrendously shocking, and Harry Kane was playing that role of centre-back. The writing was there a little bit in terms of the previous games where he'd been playing as defensive mid or centre back, wherever, and not getting forward, not making those runs he used to be doing. But I think that's one example, perhaps, of a potential avoidable blunder, or just if you do some sort of like rage transfer without thinking, obviously could be a considered blunder. But I think example sheer bad luck would be knowing which City or United player or Liverpool player is going to be hauling specifically that week. Is it going to be Martial? Is it going to be Bruno? Is it going to be Rashford? We can't always predict it, and say with City and Liverpool.
You see, this is the thing, is that someone could shoot you down and say, why should you ever captain a City attacker, especially at this point of the season, considering everybody is so prone to rotation. And so, it's then, no matter what, it's a matter of perspective, I guess, what is a blunder and what is just bad luck in that regard. And these are the difficulties with FPL, and I guess that's why you people listen to this podcast and listen to other podcasts and read the news and read the Twitter and look at Ben Dinnery's feed to try and figure out as much as you can to give as much evidence and as much weight to every decision you make. And sometimes it just doesn't work out, or often it may not work out. And sometimes, do you know what? You can have a season where everything just goes your way, and that's just the luck of the draw. And so the most you can do is, I think, as Tom says, try to create a situation where you're just happy with your decision and try not to dwell on it too much if it goes poorly.
Yeah, that's it. It's all a matter of perspective, as you nicely put it. I mean, I'm not too keen to look over past decisions pretty much ever. Maybe I'd be option 4 on the Twitter poll. I just want to close the door behind it and forget about it. But if it's gone spectacularly wrong, so something, like selling Salah pre-Bournemouth last season, I will look into it because I think that's probably just good practice, isn't it? I mean, in these cases, Andy Bastable said in response to the Twitter poll, it's very hard to overlook a bad outcome, a hugely bad outcome, and to evaluate how bad your thinking was if that's the outcome, which is fair enough, to be honest. I do believe that. But I guess in many ways you can always put something down. You can always put it down to something else if you want to and avoid responsibility, and that's very helpful for some. To be blaming Twitter experts, something like that. In reality, of course, we can never know the outcome, which is what makes FPL so exciting and moreish, as those big wins are cherished and really make up for the deep lows in those sort of bizarre sort of moments that we get in playing this game. But yeah, I guess if you're still listening to us, at this point in the very elongated season, you're well versed in these sorts of things. Just moving us on then to hindsight. So hindsight bias, or the better name I came across in research, creeping determinism, is better known as the I knew it all along effect. This is basically linked to hindsight bias, but it's a commonly observed behaviour you all know. If people act like a result was more predictable after the fact than it was at the time. And a really fantastic example of this was, I posted this on Twitter, and I'm sure you won't mind me naming him, my friend Graham. He spectacularly benched Antonio this week. It was his first bench. And he sent me a statement to read because of how bad it was. He said, if you look at the players, who could I have dropped?
Headed paper and all, it's like signature.
Yeah, just over WhatsApp. But he said, if you look at my players, who could I have dropped? Salah, KDB, Fernandes, Pulisic. So that was his midfield. He had Greenwood, Ings, and Jimenez up front. And he just said he basically couldn't find a way to fitting Antonio in. And he said, that's my statement for the pod. And I still maintain that it was a good decision to go that way. And I said back to him, basically, I'm not sure why you'd have signed Antonio if you weren't playing him against Norwich, because when are you going to play him, basically? Do you guys think that that's an element of hindsight a little bit? Sorry, Graham, but I'm not too sure that that's quite... I think that's probably a bit of a mistake, I'm afraid.
I think it's easy for us to say with hindsight, isn't it? And that's the problem.
Double hindsighted. Yeah.
You said it.
Sorry, I had to do it. But of course, like he's named my midfield from last week that I was very happy with. So it's like it would be very hard for me to say like, oh God, you should definitely have tried to find a way to drop one of those midfielders or those strikers that everybody owned. And these are the risks I think that you have to take from time to time. And so do I understand his logic? Yes. But at the same time, as you say, Tom, if you're going to invest that much money in your fifth midfielder and have the strike force that you have, what are you doing and who do you have as defenders at that point? And that then feeds into the way that FPL works, which is trying to utilize your budget to make the most points across the team. And that's where there's an error here, and it's not necessarily in the selection this individual week. It's the selections and the transfers that have led to this position where he had to bench Antonio.
Well, yeah, I think that's the situation I've ended up in a little bit, because I've benched the wrong player 2 weeks in 3. So I benched Greenwood and I benched Jimenez, and I remember actually talking about bringing in Virgil van Dijk, and I ended up going a different path on the pod. So perhaps I should have followed my initial thoughts there rather than listening to the advice of my esteemed colleagues, but never mind. I think it's very unfortunate for Graham, but I think we've all been in similar situations there. So you have to feel for the guy. But we also had a question from Benny Blanco, who said to us, is it ridiculous that we all didn't buy and captain Sterling this week? And that is definitely a question asked with the benefit of hindsight there, because I think, looking at the facts, many of us had De Bruyne and Mahrez already, who had been excellent servants over the course of the season for their owners, and making a sideways move there could have easily blown up in your face. De Bruyne and Mahrez actually had better points per game at that particular moment in time. Sterling was just he's not been having the best of seasons, to be honest. Had pretty patchy form compared to the last few years. Particularly, I didn't notice that, particularly in terms of like his chance creation and assist stats. So he's only assisted 5 goals this season compared to 15 last campaign, 17 the one before, and 14 the one before. And by contrast, Mahrez had 13 assists and De Bruyne 21 assists. And in that game, De Bruyne created 5 chances, Mahrez created 4 chances. Could have easily gone slightly different route there in terms of the overall points, as we've already discussed. So I think definitely an element of hindsight. We'd all love to have owned Sterling, but he was a bit too expensive really to fit into our teams. We had other City assets that were cheaper and what we considered better value.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, there were obviously like the late riser and big man Bakar who made the Salah to Sterling swap, and again, kudos, really good. I mean, it's a blind spot maybe for a lot of us, over focusing on bringing the likes of Vardy in. Salah had just gone big, and he was the obvious route, as I mentioned, to Sterling for many, and. I think that after players that had a huge haul like that, he kind of makes himself a bit unsellable, doesn't he? Should we have looked at him a bit more? Should we have done that, or is that just hindsight telling me? It's easy to tie yourself up in knots, isn't it? I mean, kudos to those who sold Salah. But if you look at the match, and if you did watch the match and you've looked at the data, Salah 1.22 XG, 2 big chances, 4 shots on target, 3 key passes. You've got to be thinking you're very, very unlucky not to get anything there. And Nick, who unfortunately captain Mane, one sellout stat is that he had a 0.65 XA and created 2 big chances. And watching the game, he was very unlucky not to get anything. If those happen and Sterling doesn't score big, he had an XG of 1.31, so not a million miles from Salah's 1.22, scored 3 goals, maybe he scores just 1. This is all a bit moot. So maybe it's an example of outcome bias again. But it's completely true, of course, as I mentioned earlier on to one of the responses to the poll, that real life and outcomes are not adjusted for luck. So yeah, as Stag said earlier on, that 50-point differential is really huge and really quite stark, isn't it?
It's just sickening because sorry, I'm now self-indulgent, but I sold Salah 2 weeks ago, and this happens. Like, it's like I sell Salah, he gets his haul, and then I didn't even bother bringing in Sterling. I brought in Mahrez, who I was unhappy with, so I sold him, and I ended up with bloody Tony Martial. That worked out okay, but over a 2-week period, you end up down 40 or 50 points, and like on paper, none of the decisions are necessarily wrong. And you could have said, God, if I brought in Sterling a week earlier, I would have been very lucky because he came off the bench and got a goal and assist or whatever. But you could say, oh, but he's just a talented player, so that's what. Of course, you weren't lucky. You just brought in a great player, but he's been crap for about a third of the season as well. So it's like, I think framing as well is a pretty big aspect of how people look at their decisions and other people's decisions. And we could tie ourselves up in knots all day, but it is at that point just hindsight.
Exactly. And then chasing points, I guess, is what this leads on to naturally, because if you're dealing with hindsight, should you be paying attention to what's just happened and using that sort of hindsight to inform your decision making? So Adam at FPL Patience, name checks out, I suppose, asks if we should ever use hindsight to chase points and inform my FPL purchases. And I think the answer to this is yes at times. I'm not going to get into the discussion of what form is and if it exists. But sometimes if a player has scored for a couple of weeks in a row and has form for form, so think about how we'll all regard Danny Ings next season if he starts scoring goals, then it might be a good idea to jump on the bandwagon and fully embrace it. And maybe this is more about bandwagon than the bandwagon effects. The aversion to bandwagons as well is certainly there, and you can see it in a lot of people when they talk on or comment on FPL Twitter. And often we get a warped sense of chasing points because of FPL Twitter's weird influence on our perceptions. So, for example, again, congratulations to you all. But my timeline this week was absolutely chock-a-block with Antonio owners, Antonio captainers, Sterling captainers, Jesus captainers, owners of all 3. Everyone I thought had 100 points. Looks at my rank. Oh, my rank had barely moved. In fact, I had a green arrow on Saturday from 25 points when people were posting scores at 80 and 90. It was only Jimenez who actually did any damage to me yesterday. So the reality is, obviously, what you see is an intensely, acutely focused outcome. And I'd say don't get too over focused on finding the next differential sometimes. Like if a player is looking hot in your judgment for eye tests, the stats, don't get too held back by thinking you're purely chasing points, jumping on the bandwagon. Obviously, some things are, like Jordan Egan, buying him was jumping on the bandwagon to stupid effect. But sometimes with these things, you've got to be able to make a good decision. And I think maybe, as you'll hear in my transfer to captains this week, buying Raheem Sterling may be something that I will be jumping on. What do you guys reckon to that? Should we ever chase points? Is chasing points even a thing?
I think it goes both ways, doesn't it? You sometimes feel like you are chasing points if you bring in a player who's just netted a hat trick, but then you see other managers being stubborn and saying I'm not going to bring in this player now. Sunk cost fallacy, isn't it? Where if you missed out on the hat trick, that's it. I'm not playing Sterling. I'm going to stick with the players I've got and stick with the tools I've got and hope they deliver the following week. But you do, as you said, the market forces shows that there is way too much chasing points going on. We've seen John Egan sort of appearing in that top 10 2 weeks in a row now, and it reminds me a bit of Yannick Vestergaard at the start of the season, come game week 5 when 196,000 managers transferred him in, and then the following week 168,000 managers transferred him in off the back of basically a goal against Manchester United and not much more else. So, you do see sometimes these scenarios where people just bring in these players. Also reminds me of I think of Stephen Ward that season where he rocketed all the way up to about 5.4 million or something. Because just people, yeah, the Irish flag is out again just because of, a few bonus points and a couple of assists, basically. So, yeah. I think you can chase points, but I think chasing points makes sense in some circumstances, but can be taken too far in certain other circumstances.
I can only echo that, I think, but I would say that someone who's, what you could say is chasing points is actually just, buying form. And in that case, then it's totally fine. So there is an element of sense and an eye test obviously required to whatever form you're buying into / points you're chasing. So, if you pick players who are flashing in the pan, Dom Solanke, Diogo Jota, Fabinho, then of course, that's probably chasing points as opposed to buying form. These players aren't going to continue, but then maybe FPL sometimes is being able to recognize that difference that sometimes occurs, let's say in the Etienne Capoue zone, where a player there's a tactical change that means that a player who has never before been seen to do this to deliver attacking output consistently does so for a short period and then is never heard from again.
Yep, is he Mo Salah or a load of Capoue? Final question then, how do we make better decisions? I think probably an easy one to round off. What do you guys think then? As a man who is in a negative decision spiral, Stag, what are you doing to get yourself out of it?
I think I've actually transcended the spiral at this point. I now just accept.
Nirvana of the
yeah, exactly. I just accept how I am, and that's fine. And I got a green arrow as a result, maybe you might say. No, one thing I would like to think about is that I think that the effects of hindsight bias, I'm just going to call it the Twitter effect, etc., really affect me in particular when I'm selecting my game week 1 team and twice a season when I'm selecting my wildcard teams. You can really get into the groupthink and basically set yourself up poorly if you let yourself, be the architect of your decision making, I guess, at that point. If you look at Twitter too much at that point, you end up basically trying to take back control of your team for weeks on end through your transfers to maybe, let's say, have the team that you're happy with because you felt like you had to cover this defense because so many others had them, or you needed to have this attacker, so you just budget-wise screwed yourself over across the whole entire team to make a compromise to just make sure that you were happy about that 5 accounts that you saw on Twitter that happened to have Mohamed Salah in their team, when really you would have preferred Sadio Mane, for example, as a game week 1 choice. And then secondly, something which I haven't consciously done before, and maybe you'll say, Anthony, this has been FPL, this is how the game works, how have you not been doing this before? I'm probably going to make captaining midfielders my default position from now on, because the fact of the matter is that when the luck comes in, you get more points, you probably get more bonus points, you get more points for a goal, and there are just more midfielders who score in the league year on year than ever before, it seems. Like there are very few poachers of the Aguero or Danny Ings variety left, and even the likes of Gabriel Jesus, Raul Jimenez, even Tony Martial now seem to have become much more playmaking in their approach to the game, and this is definitely all with a view towards feeding midfielders. And the fact of the matter is it doesn't seem like we're ever going to see Mo Salah or Sadio Mane reclassified as forwards, so you might as well just really cash in and just keep captaining midfielders and screw captaining forwards.
Yeah, I liked your slogan there. Felt very much out of the Charlie Methven school of thought to take back control. But I think the only thing I could think of perhaps that is just to try not to rush your decision making as much as possible, and it's quite hard to do, to be honest, when we have these game weeks where we've got these very, very tight deadlines. For instance, it's going to be less than 24 hours until the next deadline, but just make sure before you press that button to make that transfer that you've really sort of weighed up the consequences. You've looked at the alternative. Most of the people who are listening know all of this already, but you've analysed the fixtures, you've watched highlights if you've got a chance, or even underlying stats. I know everyone doesn't necessarily have the time and day to complete all of those activities, but to try and just spend a few minutes just doing that additional research, and then that way, once you've made that decision, you understand why you've done it, and you can back yourself. And if it goes wrong, it goes wrong. At least you know that you've done your research, as opposed to just taking a lucky hit and not really looked at other alternatives.
As I said last week, my key things to do are One, write down your initial decisions per week and see if I'm feeling the same throughout the course of the game week in terms of the transfer I'm going to make. In normal times, you may get screwed by price movements, so you may have to move slightly early, but normally I try to wait until Friday. You'll see that in most sort of places where outcome bias and hindsight bias are mentioned, so keep a rolling sort of a log of how you're feeling and how things are going for you to try to mitigate against these factors. The other things I mentioned is don't make decisions under stress. That's a terrible idea. And if you get into a negative decision spiral, i.e. thinking whatever I do it wrong, try to stick to the same process. As I've mentioned several times, you have to recognize that there's a lot of luck and randomness involved with FPL.
Cool. Right. Let's take a break now and we'll be back with the mini league update and the questions.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist?
So we're back and let's catch up with the Who Got the Assist mini league. Now, Anthony, you have the table. What's going on there? Is it all change?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of change in fairness. Poor old Mark Bird has definitely stopped flying. He's down from 9th now to 10th, having been, I think, up as high as 4th a few weeks ago. 67 points, -4, and even bench boosted. So that hasn't gone particularly well for him. Up from 11th to 9th is Sean B. His team, never forget, scored 67 points. Bruno Fernandes, captain, obviously didn't quite work out for him. Adi Mansour, down from 2nd after getting only 47 points this week. Fernandes cap there as well, largely accounting for his issues. Daniel Ray with Salah Niquaz, he's still in 7th, 62 points. Martin Janssen is the biggest winner in the top 10 this week. He's up from 21st to 6th with 99 points. Sterling captain, obviously doing most of that for him. Jake Gallagher is down from 1st to 5th with Sheffield Wednesday, 44 points only. Fernandes captaincy there again, and I think you're seeing a theme there in that I think it's 8 of our top 10 have captained Fernandes. MJ back up from 6th to 4th with his team, the Cop, scoring 68 points, same as myself, but without any hits. Fernandes captaincy wasn't enough to hold him back. Alex Coates up from 5th to 2nd, or joint 2nd actually. His team Haller at Me scored 74 points. Fernandes captaincy, up from 4th to the joint 2nd with him is Adam Warner. His team Bury 94, 74 points. Fernandes captaincy holding him back, but still doing quite well there. And up from 3rd to 1st is Nathan Wollaston's The Woolly Ones, 95 points this week. Sterling captaincy doing the biggest damage for him, but he also had the Doherty clean sheet. He had Son's 13, Martial's 13, Raul Jimenez's 8, and Bruno Fernandes' assist as well.
I was just laughing just then about your absolute butchering of Niçoise. It's a sad Niçoise, not a Niçoise.
Yeah. I realized
from the pronunciation expert of the group.
Yeah, no, I realized it after I said it, and I was like, oh, hopefully I get away with this one, but no.
Oh dear. Anyway, yeah, well done, Nathan. Great week for you. Good to see you top of the league. I think the website's still updating at the moment, but was overall ranked 16, at least at one point, so having just an absolutely fantastic season there.
Jeez, yeah, amazing, really, and it's incredible as well in terms of those kind of really strong risers and those really stark fallers, that the haves and the have-nots and the harsh binary you mentioned earlier on. Having those players, such an impact this week. Right, let's move on to the questions then. The first one, yet again, about the back. Forget at the back. So maybe the final evolution of big at the back. The Typhlosion, the Charizard big at the back, is maybe that's upon us. David BR76 asks if it's time to just ignore the defence and keep it all together. He says he wants to improve his defence, yet he thinks it's probably not worth a transfer. What do we think?
It's probably not worth it. I would say stick with the Charmander defense. Like the ceiling just isn't high enough there. Like if you've 3 good fixtures per week, then really you've no need to worry. Just sort the rest of your team out, pick up points from goals and assists, and get your captaincies right. That's really where the priority should be at this point.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I've got Soyuncu in my team, so I do feel like I have to make some form of defensive transfer to try and sort it out. So if you're in my circumstance, kind of makes sense to still think about the defence, but looking at the sort of the rogues gallery of options available at the price range, there's really no one to get particularly excited about. I think if you've got a case where you've got the sufficient coverage, like the Wolves defence already, or Burnley or Sheffield United, then by all means just leave it for the end of the season and focus on the rest of your team. I mean, they're never the most exciting transfers, and it's just if it's the pursuit of chasing a clean sheet, especially once we reach this end of the season where it's very, very unpredictable. For instance, we saw 4 teams in the relegation battle winning this game week, then, it's probably worth leaving it.
Yeah, maybe good old David didn't actually tell us his team there, but I would say if you have a Man United defender, just like you're wasting a slot having a United defender, as poor Tom is feeling there with Maguire still. I had to bite the bullet and sell him ahead of this game week. So I would say, yeah, probably free up that spot and get your Martial, Fernandes, Greenwood, Rashford, whatever. Just make better use of that slot.
It's getting ridiculous now, though. I've got to take a -8 to get rid of Maguire. I just don't think I'm going to do it. I'm just going to leave him there. And in fact, I'm probably going to bench him this week and play Dawson over him.
Oh, I can't wait for the 15-point haul.
Yeah, it's going to happen, isn't it? It's really going to effing happen. But it's so annoying. I wish I'd gone that way. I just thought, the 90-minute man thing. And to be honest, he's done all right in terms of clean sheets over the course of the restart. I think he's logged 3, hasn't he? Yeah, for Sheffield United, Brighton, and Villa. It's not happening, is it? No. In general, I'm absolutely ignoring my defenders, and that's just because free transfers are so precious. And as discussed last week, I don't really see any upside to buying defenders right now. The value is there over the course of the season, but it's very rarely there over the course of just 3 game weeks. An honourable exception may well be Alonso for 1 week, if you want to do it. So if you are flush with money and you see, there's leakers out there, there's a Rockstar, of course, there's also a new one on the single, like Scarface or something. I'm not too sure whether I believe in him or not. But if they both say Alonso is looking like the likely starter, he might be worth bringing him for that Norwich game. That'll probably be the only one I'd be vaguely interested in bringing him over the price of 4.5 million. Like the likes of maybe Lewis Dunk or something, I'd be more inclined to bring in if I was doing a defensive transfer at the moment. There's just no value there because there's only 3 game weeks left, and you'd be better off using your free transfer somewhere else. So David and anybody else who's looking at defenders, yes, it is the case of forget at the back. Just move on to other spots in your team, as we've discussed ad nauseam already. Next question, Kun Karam, who achieved 106 points this week. He had Antonio, Sterling captain, all because I advised him, so maybe I should get some points as a donation towards that free hit. But he says, with 3 game weeks left for this season, and many are playing something in their mid leagues, can we pick differentials from each position to help us climb the ranks? And similarly, Charles Hazel asked the same, top 3 punts for those chasing in mini leagues. This is quite interesting because obviously we've said bin off defenders and bin off attackers, so it might be interesting to see who we've actually gone with. Just to go first, because I always go last and you guys always end up taking the ones that I was going to say. In terms of defenders, it's Tarkovsky, solid, and he's got goal threat. Double up with Pope, he's a good differential if you're a Pope owner. Wolves, Norwich and Brighton to end the season with. In midfield, 2, I'm not going to bother with forwards because they're all terrible. Greenwood +1, you're done. David Silva, end of an era for El Majo. That basically means the end of it. Bournemouth, Watford and Norwich. And we're going to assume that Norwich game is going to be set up the Spaniard effectively. I can imagine they're all going to be passing it to him, trying to get him to score, trying to get him to assist, trying to get him to do whatever. He'll be on all set plays, all penalties, whatever. The final one in midfield is Trossard, the Trossard wagon. I really like that. He was one who was beloved of the analytics crew earlier on in the season. They were really drooling over him. He had really decent numbers. His numbers are okay, obviously not revolutionary, but a case of why not. I mentioned with Lewis Dunk earlier, if you're really looking for a defender pick, he always seems to score. But yeah, they've got Southampton, Newcastle and Burnley to end the season and look relatively safe. So maybe Graham Potter will be looking to create some sort of crazy new Pep-esque formation, Pep-like formation for the next year. And Trossard looks like he's finally coming into his stride. So yeah, 3 for me, Tarko, David Silva, Trossard and Dunk in comments too. What do you guys think?
I think in defence, I actually was quite impressed by Kyle Walker-Peters tonight in terms of his performance against Manchester United. He was making quite a lot of attacking, darting runs and getting a few crosses on. Ings probably should have been in the right place to put a couple of those away potentially. So I think I quite like him as a little bit of a differential picker. Only 4.4 million, and Southampton have Brighton, Bournemouth, and Sheffield United, so they've got some quite nice fixtures to close off the season. They're playing with a lot of confidence as well, putting some good performances. So I think I quite like him as a little defensive pick. In midfield, I've kind of picked out Silva as well as the one that I noticed as the best differential. It's a bit of a slack wagon there, but he's only 4.7% owned, and with those Bournemouth and Norwich games, it's obviously he's leaving the club. It feels like very much a sort of nostalgic pick, just to kind of round off the David Silva era. Real, an amazing player that the Premier League was blessed to see over the past 5 or 6 years. So Silva, perhaps in midfield, and then up front, I just kind of called out Olivier Giroud. Maybe there was a bit of a bust up, wasn't there, with Tammy Abraham and Lampard supposedly, and Giroud since the restart's been looking really, really decent, hasn't he? 15 goal attempts, which is sick for all the forwards, and 3 goals to his name as well. So why not Norwich at home? If he's starting, you hear early that he's starting, then perhaps a little bit of a buff, perhaps a little bit of a punt there.
Right. So defenders, we've been talking them down. I've talked about City defenders being an interesting pick for weeks. They probably have the best pictures, but at the end of the day, do you really want to be wasting a transfer bringing in a City defender at this rate? Probably not. So I think good old Lewis Dunk, Tom's pick, was actually a pretty good one, considering that Brighton have solid, decent fixtures and he is a goal threat. In midfield, a troll for Nick, really, Stuart Armstrong from Southampton. Great fixtures, good goal against United. Great player, isn't he, Nick? So I'd be considering him. I do like the Trossard pick. He was kind of my preseason darling that didn't really pay too much dividends for me when he was in my Game Week 1 team. But I do like the idea of having Trossard in your team, but I'm not sure it's going to go well for anybody. And we are officially in the Ayoze Perez zone. I know Leicester are crap, but we are officially in that zone at this point. The inverse Richarlison himself, I think I expect something good from him at some point in these next 3 weeks. And I'm going to call Gabriel Jesus a differential and just annoy people and recommend him, because I don't want to recommend somebody like, I don't know, McBurney or Deeney or something. So I'll just give you that one. One thing about David Silva as a pick as well is he's unlikely to do a John Terry and walk off as a sub in the 21st minute, which is at least something for everybody there. But something to keep in mind as well, actually, only 3 of the top 11 scorers this game week were owned by more than 5% of teams, and that was one of those was Jesus, who's 5.2, Son 6.5, and then obviously Sterling 17.7. So there are big points to be got from differentials if you pick the right ones, but that's the problem if you pick the right one.
Yeah, exactly. The differential lottery, or differential roulette, to coin a phrase. Right, next question. Mala Mainstream. Diraj Pandey is looking at the Liverpool midfielders after the game week. He's wondering whether basically either should be in our teams anymore. Nick, Mane owner, upset after captaining him and having a captain fail. Are you looking to boot him out? We were saying offline before the pod that you just realised that you had a route to Sterling there. Is what you're seriously considering?
I hadn't really been considering it until that particular moment, and I started thinking actually that is a really good route to Sterling, because my original kind of response to this question was just to remember how much Mo Salah loves Arsenal. He's in 5 appearances, he's had 6 goals and 4 assists against them, which is more combined than any other Premier League club. So Arsenal is basically Salah's favourite club, and I've got fond memories of actually captaining him against Arsenal over the past couple of seasons and getting some really big hauls when other managers didn't get them. So that's my only comment in regards to Salah. Like, how many times have people been punished for selling this guy? But I do understand the appeal and the significant cash cow that he can be, to allow you to bring in someone like Raheem Sterling, who's just got a hat-trick and got much better fixtures than Liverpool have for the final 3. So yeah, it's a risk is all I'm going to say.
It's going to end in disaster if you sell them, because that's always how it works. But at the same time, I think on paper there are, as we say, teams with better fixtures. There is a better way to use that money. Both of them will probably explode one more time at least before the end of this week. Like, as we were just pointing out, I think twice, if not 3 times on the pod, the fact of the matter is that Salah had similar statistics to Raheem Sterling, but there was a cavernous gap between the two of them in terms of points returned this week, and that could easily invert next game week in spite of who both teams are playing.
Yep, pretty agree with that. I think actually as well, like, I know people are saying they've got Chelsea to come, and
Chelsea, like, they can't keep a clean sheet if you paid them.
Exactly. Like, it's kind of, Arsenal and Chelsea. If you're seriously sitting there and looking at those two fixtures and going, "Oh, they're rid on the FPL, I'm getting rid," you got to be wondering, really. Yeah, really. I mean,
a game against mid-table Arsenal.
Well, yeah,
Like, the fact of the matter is, if he was playing against Sheffield United earlier in the season, nobody would have been too worried, even though they were above Arsenal all this time and looked much more solid defensively all year, you know?
exactly. Well, two things. One, the FDR is completely redundant because it's a 5-point scale where they don't use 0.1 and 0.5. They don't want to offend anyone. So you've got a 3-point scale, which is basically good, bad, or middle. Like, what an absolute fucking waste of time that is. But anyway, Arsenal and Chelsea, I mean, they're both fixtures in which you'd perceivably say on the other side they're going to go for it, which is going to be more space for Salah. And also Chelsea are going to be fresh off the back of playing an FA Cup game on Sunday against Manchester United before their game against Liverpool. And indeed, that could be a captainable game for Salah, actually, because he'll be, I guess, aiming for the Golden Boot as the stated aim. So I think maybe it's resulting a bit. Unfortunately, Daraj, I think maybe it's a bit overthinky. Maybe, I mean, if you seriously are looking to, buy a Martial or buy Sterling or something like that, then as Nick is looking at, that makes sense. But I'm not too sure it's worth overthinking it too much. Like, for context, I've got Salah in my team, I've got KDB in my team. I'm basically just forgetting that they're there, and I'm going to leave them there for the rest of the season. I think that's going to be the way it is. If you really need to move them on to accomplish some other goal that you're convinced is needed, do it. But otherwise, just don't overthink it. Right. Next question. Target Schmarget. So Carl at Coot FPL asked if Operation Target Bournemouth has now swapped to Operation Target Leicester, but really asks if there's any life in the targeting strategy anymore. And friend of the pod, Takar, asks if Target Bournemouth is now dead. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I watched that game, the Bournemouth-Leicester game, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing almost in the second half. Like, was it a fluke? Was it Leicester being really bad? Was it Bournemouth being really good? Somewhere in between?
Was it something to do with the centre-back literally losing his mind for a few seconds?
Yeah, maybe. Like, it was really weird, wasn't it? I still expect City to turn over Bournemouth. But I guess maybe in hindsight, connection. We should probably have presented Antonio as more of an option against Norwich, and maybe we should have.
I'd have totally done that if I was here. You all know that, though.
Yeah, absolutely. Easy to say in hindsight, isn't it? But yeah, I think I'm going to be targeting Norwich with Pulisic. Leak permitting, of course. And it sounds like from what Lampard's remarks were, that Pulisic should be okay. So he said that he did take him off after 60th minute against Sheffield United, but said that he was, affecting games in a good way, and he was very happy with him. So I think Pulisic should be my captain. Spoilers this week against Norwich, so maybe a Chelsea player, maybe worth looking at. But yeah, I mean, I'm not sure they're quite dead in the water because you've got Man City next, and I'm sure that the market forces are going to be moving towards buying Man City players in. And yeah, I mean, it's more, as I've said, just a case of where you think the point's going to be. That's going to come against the weaker teams. And some people have said, oh, maybe Norwich are going to turn it around now. And because they're relegated, they're going to throw off the shackles of expectation and start to play very well. They're still not very good. So
if they do, sorry, a bit of a digression, but if they do, is that not the most frustrating thing ever? Because they were such a good team at the start of the year, and you just be looking at them just like, what are you doing? Like, I don't know if I'd ever buy one of their ex-players if they came back into the Premier League next season, if that's how they do it. Like,
it's like that guy who comes into the office. He's very, very good to begin with, and then he kind of tails off, and then he's moving on somewhere else, and then he's suddenly really good before he's leaving because he's suddenly really confident again, or basically Willian around the time he's got a new contract coming up.
Viduka.
Yeah. Oh, what a player Mark Duker is, though, for Champman players. Yeah, no, as I said, it's basically Operation Bournemouth was maintaining a good idea, as Nick maintained too. I think it's one of those things that it was a bit of a strange game, Bournemouth and Leicester, maybe fitting into the randomness idea that I spoke about earlier on. And targeting Bournemouth and targeting the likes of Bournemouth, so targeting Norwich, probably still a good idea. So I'm probably not going to say that target is in the bin. Nick, what do you reckon?
Yeah, it was a bit of an odd game, wasn't it, with all the teams that we've been discussing about targeting, like West Ham or Watford, Bournemouth and Aston Villa, all winning. But instead we saw like the teams that were on the beach this game week that performed really badly. In contrast, so the likes of Palace, the likes of Newcastle, the likes of Everton as well, all being really bad. And Norwich were really bad as well. And as you said, that's perhaps the one team we really should now be considering targeting. They are fully relegated, unlike Bournemouth and Villa, who probably harbour some belief that they still might be able to survive off the back of sort of 4 points in 2 games. But Norwich are fully relegated. Morale at that club's going to be rock bottom. And they've just been probably the worst team in the league. So it's right that they're relegated. They've conceded the most goals now since the restart with 15. And they've conceded the most goals just generally over the course of the season, and most shots on target, various other stats. They're right at the bottom for. So I think there is a case potentially for targeting Norwich if you fancy to still try and follow that strategy, even though it didn't work out for Tottenham assets. Certainly didn't work out for some of the Leicester assets. I think, why not go for a target Norwich approach? The next few games could work out effectively. Norwich are relegated, as I said, so they've got nothing to play for, and they're probably broken as a team.
Yeah, little to add, only just to remind people of that time that Newcastle drubbed Spurs after they'd been relegated a few years ago, just because it was funny.
Cheers for that.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah,
there was a Wijnaldum hat-trick or something, wasn't there?
It was, yeah. Signed off his Newcastle career at the time, I think, with that.
Yeah, lad only all at home, didn't he? Right, and the final question this week. Chasing Chelsea. So Ed, FPL Rhinos, has no Chelsea. So he wants to know if it's worth bringing in one of those Chelsea players versus Norwich, seeing as they have Poole and Wolves in their final 2 fixtures. And this is an excellent segue question, which we always love and always try to look for. To our transfers and captains. Let's take Ed's question first, and then we'll segue onwards very smoothly to our transfers and captains. So if you have no Chelsea, I think that, as we saw with West Ham, like most of us probably have no interest in holding a West Ham asset long term being 3 weeks, of course. But probably it would have been a good idea to, move Pulisic for Antonio in hindsight. Oh, you said it again. The reality is that if you are...
It's like...
just headbutts his microphone in anger. But I mean, if you are looking for a 1 week punt, obviously the Chelsea asset is a great idea. Like if you're moving up Mahrez or something like that because you're convinced that maybe Mahrez won't play, as perhaps I am, maybe you'd be looking at Chelsea in some way, shape or form. If you've got a Vardy or something, you see in Malik that Sexy Man Giroud or Tammy Abraham, the Championship striker, are playing, bring them in. Probably worth a 1 week rental, but nothing more than that. Liverpool haven't been too good at keeping clean sheets, but Wolves have been pretty tight. So maybe it is narrowly just looking over the course of a 1 week return and then shifting on or benching.
Likewise with me, I think that realistically, given what we've just seen happen to Norwich, I think you'd be silly not to have a Chelsea attacker. Obviously, leagues permitting, I think Pulisic is probably the one to have. Obviously, Willian maybe has the form since the restart, if you believe in it. I wouldn't necessarily go for any of their strikers, even on a loan. I think that at best they seem to only play 60, 65, 70-ish minutes. And I don't know if it's worth it considering their talents anyway. But even with Liverpool and Wolves after that, if you did end up stuck with them for whatever crisis that might break out in your team, it's a Chelsea player with Champions League to play for against, first of all, Liverpool, who will be, quote unquote, on the beach perhaps, especially given that they don't seem to be putting in the success that we are getting, the success that we expected them to have after winning the title, to, let's say, push for these records that they were allegedly going to be pushing for. I know you could say that Nick Pope was the only reason for that, but they always found a way every other game before they won the title, put it that way, except against Watford, of course. And then against Wolves, like Wolves could be out of the Champions League race by the time Game Week 38 comes, so it might not be the worst time to have a Chelsea player.
Yeah, I think if you want to make a 1 week punt, then I would definitely tie up the Willian or Pulisic. I wouldn't touch the defence. They're absolutely horrendous. As you saw from the 3-0 drubbing that Sheffield United gave them, they've got a rubbish goalkeeper and Zuma and Christensen. They're just not up to standard, are they? So avoid the defence, even though it's Norwich at home. If you're free hitting, then by all means get a Chelsea defender in. But otherwise, because of what comes next with Liverpool and Wolves, just don't bother. And Pulisic, Willian, great targets for 1 week, but it is a 1 week punt ultimately. Cool. So should we move on then to transfers and captains? And talking about Chelsea, I'm probably going to captain Pulisic actually. As long as I know he starts, I think it's probably give him a chance to be the captain and disappoint me on a Saturday afternoon and ruin the game week. So probably going to go for that.
It'll
be a Tuesday night. Yeah,
they're all merging. All the days are merging into one. I can't even keep up anymore. I looked at it and I thought it was a Saturday morning fixture and the only game on Saturday. It's a Tuesday tomorrow. So I'm going to bring in Pulisic for some Tuesday evening disappointment as my captain. In terms of my transfers, there's a few things I've got to think about it a little bit longer before making decisions. I had sort of plans to bring in Danny Ings maybe for Jimenez, but I don't even know who I'd bench in regards to that move anyway, so I'm probably going to not bother with that. I could do Mane to Sterling. I could do Salient for some rubbish defender, but I've got Cresswell playing anyway, so I don't know if that's worth it either. So yeah, I've got 2 free transfers. Going to do something, I'm sure. I'm not going to waste it. I'm not going to burn it. But decided, yeah, probably going to only do 1 move. Give me 2 for game week 37.
Nick confirms he's making a transfer. Cheers.
Knight in shining armor, Cresswell. I think that's worrying, isn't it? Worrying times for everybody. It's the most 2020 thing, I think. I've got Cresswell playing at least. Oh man, right?
Some brilliant underlying stats.
Okay, you got a clean sheet. Highest point scorer in the team, Nick, this week. Right.
Yeah, and third for chances created out of defenders since the restart.
With hindsight, that was a great pick, actually. One last go. Sorry.
Excellent. Okay, so what am I going to do? So the Derry Cracker asked, "What the hell are we going to do with Vardy?" Forgot to wedge that in earlier on. But this impacts my T's and C's. Sometimes I was saying now, I'm considering getting rid. It was always going to be a 1 week rental. But I could be persuaded to keep now. A couple of confirmation bias pieces I could probably throw out there. So Vardy from Sheffield, he's a Wednesdayite, according to Athletic, was playing football in, I don't know what they do in the north, play in garages, back alleys or something. And he rustled Sheffield United fans last time. But will he be as up for it without a crowd? I don't really know. 2, feasibly Leicester will need to react against Sheffield United in order to keep up their Champions League chase, I suppose. But Sheffield United didn't know how to defend again. And no Maddison, 9 creating chances. Leicester looks an absolute wreck. So yeah, I'm probably not going to be falling into that one. So what I could do is get rid of him to Ings, and if I do that, I might as well just do Mahrez to Sterling while I'm at it. I don't think that Mahrez is going to play against Bournemouth. I think he'll play against Arsenal and maybe be rested or get a few minutes against Watford, but I don't think he's going to play against Bournemouth. I think Foden will get the run out there. And I'm only going to take a hit if I'm buying Raheem Sterling. Danny Ings seems like a just an easy buy him, and Brighton, Bournemouth next to, very, very good. I could just leave Vardy in there though, and I could do Mahrez to Foden, who I'm fairly sure is going to play this week. I don't know yet. Basically, I just don't know. It'll be a last-minute decision, and it'll be based on the league as well. So if Pulisic doesn't play, it all goes out the window, and I don't really know what I'm doing. I'll probably maybe use a transfer just to literally probably buy another Chelsea player, a Chelsea midfielder who is playing for Pulisic. If he's not, I don't know. All down to Rockstar or that Scarface fella coming through. The other thing I've got to figure out this week is I have 2 spots actually in defence alongside a TAA up for grabs. I've got Dawson, Taylor, Seiss and Maguire all jostling for 2 spots. I may play Dawson because I think a 0-0 for West Ham and Watford could go
massive goal threat.
Yeah, but 0-0 could keep them both up, I think, is kind of how it is at the moment as well. So you could have an Austria-Germany sort of situation where they both kind of accept that 0-0 is going to happen and pass around midfield, descends into a Mark Noble, a Capu sort of pass around. I don't know. Maguire's absolute toilet, so I could well be tempted to bench him and just play Seiss and Dawson. And as Nick mentioned, I'm going to mention Pulisic as well, pending the league. Anthony, what are you doing?
More hits. Basically, I have Vardy and Jimenez right now. I think I'm going to sell both of them to do something or another. I might even find a way to get Raheem Sterling into my team. Leaks dependent, I guess. If Pulisic isn't playing, I'm probably just going to go without any Chelsea attack whatsoever and probably upgrade his slot to Sterling, and then I'd have basically a dump forward plus maybe Danny Ings or something and Raheem Sterling. We shall see, basically. Otherwise, I might even go for the David Silva approach in midfield and improve things. But if I was making one transfer, it'll probably be Vardy to Gabriel Jesus. So I'm kind of keeping my options open, but just trying to chase points effectively. I'd probably captain Jesus as well if I brought him in.
Sounds like a bit of a punt there, but go for it. Why not? So let's wrap up. We were Who Got the Assist. Thanks for listening again, and we'll be back next Thursday for another pod in 3 days' time.
Yeah, I mean, we'll be back for Thursday. I think we're going to it'll be the first time during the whole lockdown that we've recorded before the game week is finished, which is probably a bit of an achievement, just because one, I don't want to spend my Friday night doing editing. Up until Maguire screwed me over, I didn't anticipate having players in West Ham, Watford, but I may well have one now. But yeah, I mean, we'll see. I think we'll probably get one out on Thursday, so you got it on Friday, so you've got a little bit of time. But I'm looking forward to the end of these night shifts and the end of these quick turnarounds in terms of a content creator. Although it has been fun watching as a fan. Hope to see you in game week 36, and we'll speak to you very, very soon. Goodbye.
Bye.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?